my name is Jeremy Barnes, and today I'm going to do a review for Daredevil Born Again Season 1. Now that the show is fully out and finished for its first season, um, I'm going to do a non spoiler review for the beginning. And this is a bit of a late review because the show has already been finished for, I think, maybe might have been 2 weeks already now. Um, it might just be one, a little bit over than one, over 1 week, I mean. But after I'm finished with the non-spoiler part, I'm gonna go fully in depth with some spoiler thoughts. But I'm gonna try to keep it as brief as I can, an hour or less, hopefully. But we'll see how it goes. So I'm gonna start off with my overall thoughts about the show, which is that it is a good show with some really solid moments, but in my opinion, never reaches the quality of any season of the original Netflix series. Um, what I say that, or what I would say that the show does really well is that it's a courtroom procedural in the beginning, which was cool while it lasted, but like I think at a certain point it kind of gets over that, or like it doesn't really want to focus on that for the rest of it, which I think kind of makes sense for the story, and I think it's the reason why the previous Netflix show was never fully just a courtroom procedural. But I would say that this show does make an attempt at that more than the original series did, and I liked when they were doing those episodes. But I think overall, I still do prefer where it was kind of going near the end, except for like some missteps that they had. Um, and I liked that kind of structure in the original Netflix series, where it's kind of more focused on the superhero aspects with some of that everyday stuff sprinkled in. Um, because I'm a huge fan of Batman, and Batman is Batman. He's not Bruce Wayne, who then suits up as Batman. He's Batman who puts face of being Bruce Wayne, and that's his actual mask. So I kind of like characters who are like that, and I would definitely, I think, put Matt Murdock in that category. He is Daredevil, at least from like what I've seen of him, because I haven't read comic books or anything, so maybe the comic books do have more of him being that like kind of lawyer. But I've only seen the Ben Affleck movie and then the entire Netflix run of Daredevil, and then now this, and from those previous incarnations before Born Again, that is kind of the focus where it's Daredevil, and we don't see that many court cases and stuff. So I like that Daredevil. Um, and I did like his lawyering here. The only thing about it that was kind of missing for me, I'll talk about in the spoiler section. But it was really strong while he was doing it, and it was a huge improvement over the lawyer stuff in the She-Hulk series, which was a kind of similar structure to what this started out as. Um, but the lawyer scenes were just like on a whole different level in terms of the writing of it. It was a lot stronger. So that was a cool addition, I think, to this season. And then some people might disagree with me on this part, but for me personally, I also don't think that Born Again even reaches the quality of the top three Disney Plus series from Marvel. But I do think it has potential, and I'm still really excited about season two. And if you're curious, I'll briefly tell you what my top three shows are, um, in no particular order. Um, but I would say for sure that Moon Knight is better than this. Loki, I'm not sure. I think it could be argued. And then WandaVision is my third favorite. I won't really compare the quality of WandaVision to Daredevil Born Again because they're like completely different types of shows. But just in terms of my personal ranking, I think I like WandaVision overall as a show more than Daredevil Born Again. But like I said, you can't really compare those two in my opinion, so don't argue about it with me. You can argue about the other two though if you want. But that's beside the point. The first kind of section I'm going to talk about is the story. And I would say that this story of Born Again mostly focuses on the rise of power for Wilson Fisk within politics. And I would say overall, that journey was kind of interesting to watch, but honestly, I didn't really, I wasn't super invested in it until the very end, pretty much. And then Matt's journey, obviously, because this is called Daredevil, is him accepting a tragedy and realizing that there are benefits to both parts of his life. Whereas before and in this show, he always kind of has this battle between his two halves, Matt Murdock and Daredevil. So that kind of ties to my point in the beginning, where he's kind of similar to Batman in that sense. And that's kind of where the lawyer procedural, courtroom procedural stuff comes in, because a lot of this is just Matt Murdock. I would say actually most of the show is Matt Murdock, and Daredevil isn't like truly born again until like pretty much close to the end of it. But season two, I expect to see a lot more Daredevil. So if you were kind of wanting more of that stuff, I think you definitely have to wait for that. Um, and Matt has kind of like focused on his Matt Murdock side before in the Defenders series, but he kind of quickly got out of it. I think maybe halfway through that show out of 8 episodes, maybe before that, I'm not really sure. But even when he didn't fully suit up again in that show, he was basically doing Daredevil stuff, even as Matt Murdock. So this show definitely goes deeper into him focusing on Matt Murdock. So that was a kind of a cool new flavor that we got to see that we never really delved into as much before. So I did like that. But I would say overall, this story focused more on the villain Wilson Fisk than it did on Matt, and it was more Wilson Fisk's journey. Like that was the focus, which is kind of similar. Not, I mean, like interesting now that I think about it because it's similar to another Marvel project that came out this year, Captain America: Brave New World. But me personally, I think that this project did a better job with what it was doing than Brave New World did. Whereas like here, I mean, obviously it has more time being a show. It does have more time to spotlight the like titular character who's supposed to be the main character of the movie, at Murdoch, even though Wilson Fisk was, in my opinion, the actually primary protagonist of it in a lot of ways. Born Again did a similar thing with Captain America Sam Wilson and Thaddeus Ross Red Hulk, where, in my opinion, that story was more focused on Red Hulk than it was Captain America. But I didn't feel the same sense of Captain America, it didn't really get to shine. Whereas here, I do think Matt Murdock and Daredevil did get to shine. I just don't think his journey was as kind of prevalent in the story as Wilson Fisk's was. And another similarity between those two projects is that it's about a political figure who has this like history of being, you could say, like a bad guy or somebody who's gotten in trouble or just had like extreme kind of methods that made them like or painted them in a bad light. Um, but Wilson Fisk actually got a bigger treatment of kind of having a statement within politics that than Thaddeus Ross did, which is what I was expecting from Brave New World. And we got more of that here with Wilson Fisk, kind of tying in like corruption into that, because you can see my Captain America review where I talk about Red Hulk. That was a little bit of a different situation, but this is not about that movie, so I'm gonna get back to Daredevil now. Um, and I would say maybe because of the story, this is probably my least favorite season of Daredevil because the story wasn't as strong as it has been in any of the other seasons, in my opinion. But I think the setup does pose kind of a route for season two to actually be really really exciting. So I'm hoping they do stick the landing with that. But the next section I'm going to talk about is the characters. And since this is still a Daredevil show, I'm going to start with Matt Murdock, Daredevil. Um, I would say Matt Murdock in this season is a lot more controlled, and in my opinion, better than in season one overall as a character, in terms of my enjoyment of him on screen, but not as good as his role in season two or three of the Netflix show. Um, and the way that I would describe his kind of arc in this season is he's like a kettle, like just waiting to explode. Um, and he gets closer and closer to that as things push him throughout the season, which is, a journey for him. But the whole time he's like trying to hold it back as much as he can, and in my opinion, he does a really good job at that, which kind of goes into that thing of him being very controlled. Whereas before, I don't think he was as like kind of holding himself back. He was I think maybe better at balancing his life in previous seasons, except for maybe season three, where that one was kind of like a flip of this, or this is a flip of season three, um, where in season three he was focused entirely on Daredevil stuff, even if he didn't suit up as Daredevil. That's what his kind of primary goal was, and then here it's primarily him being a lawyer. And then that just goes to say that Daredevil in this season is pretty much non-existent. He had like a couple of fight scenes, pretty much, and then that's kind of it. So don't expect like a lot of Daredevil. But I will say when he is there, it is pretty cool, and I do like his new costume, which is actually the other section that I forgot to mention. But I feel like there's not really that many costume characters in this season, so I guess it doesn't really need its own section. But the next character I'm going to talk about is Mayor Wilson Fisk slash Kingpin, because he does become mayor of New York City in this show. And his arc in this season, the way it starts, is really interesting and a little bit unexpected, where he's trying to keep himself calm and peaceful, and it's because he's in this new like very public position, and where he's in the spotlight of the public. So he's trying to like maintain himself and hold himself back in a similar way to Matt, which is kind of the main, I think, kind of focus or the draw of this show, where it does focus on Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, and it kind of shows them mirroring each other, and they have like um, similar arcs, I would say. Um, but for Fisk, the way that he behaves makes him seem weak, because every time we've seen him before, he's like, this vicious, like very strong, powerful figure or force. But because he's holding himself back here, I think the audience kind of underestimates him, and then the characters around him also underestimate him. But then obviously that also reaches a boiling point where he shows who he really is, and I'll go into that later. But I would say, even though the journey's similar, Kingpin is more willing to revert back to violence than Matt is, and when he does return to that, he is fucking brutal. So, um, if you were a fan of the violence or the way that it was portrayed in the Daredevil show before, I think Fisk will definitely hold that over for you, where we don't get to see much of that from Daredevil. And then a huge character this season, I think maybe her most important season, and maybe one where she has the most agency, is Vanessa Fisk, so Wilson's wife, who in this season begins kind of estranged from her husband, because we find out that it seems to me like they've been separated, not like legally separated from their marriage, but like literally like physically separated from each other for maybe up to 2 whole years, which is a long time to be away from your like marriage partner. Um, so that created a rift, and it's because of what happened in Hawkeye originally, which I think takes place at the end of 2024. And then this takes place in 2026 or 2027. I think it starts at the end of 2026, so that's where that 2 years would come in, but then it moves into the next year. Um, so at the end of Hawkeye, spoilers for that, Maya Lopez, who was like a protege of Wilson Fisk, shoots him in the eye, harming him, nearly killing him, but he somehow fucking survives. And then in the Echo series, which spin-offs from that with Maya, he's heals after I don't know how many months it is, maybe like just a few months, 3 months, maybe up to six, I'm not sure. But then in that show, he whatever happens with him and Maya, at the end they have a small confrontation, and she develops powers in that show where she does something to his mind where he's able to kind of see what traumatized him as a kid again and kind of re-experience that trauma. And I think that's kind of what kicks off his journey in this season of Daredevil, because he had to kind of look at his life and like figure out what he was gonna do next. And that whole time, I think from Hawkeye until now, he hadn't been interacting with Vanessa, which is crazy. But before that, I think he was, and they were working together within their criminal empire, which I believe Fisk had to restart after the events of Daredevil season three. Um, at whatever point he got out of jail, or prison, and we're it's not clear when that was, but at some point I think during the blip, because we do see Maya Lopez interact with Kingpin during the blip, which is also when Daredevil faces her briefly in the year 2021, which would be 3 years, excuse me, after the blip, or after Thanos snapped his fingers. Um, but anyway, Vanessa, I would say, is the true primary antagonist of the season. Um, like opposite of Daredevil's protagonist, even though I said that Wilson Fisk is the protagonist. Um, I guess he wouldn't really be described as that, but in my mind, he's kind of like the main character of the season. Maybe not the protagonist, but the main character. Still an antagonist, but I would say even above him, Vanessa is the primary antagonist for season one of Daredevil Born Again. And I would say her schemes in this season make her just like seem very evil and very, very controlled, more so than Fisk, the way that he's holding himself back. Vanessa is like on a whole another level of control. She's very methodical, with her actions, and I think that's kind of what makes her seem evil to me. But there is obviously some humanity to her as well, and we do get to see that obviously. All of that stuff is really good. The next character that I'm going to talk about actually ties those two while they're going through this this kind of rift in the relationship is Dr. Heather Glenn, who starts off as Matt's love interest in the show. Um, she's a therapist. That's what she is. She becomes a couples therapist for Vanessa and Wilson. Um, and in my opinion, she actually was Matt's best love interest that we've seen in the show, um, or in the MCU in general. Um, but at a certain point, there's like a turning point where I think the characters start realizing, and then the audience, if they didn't already feel it, they start realizing, which was the case for me, because I liked their relationship before, but then at a certain point, you realize that the love is actually not there. It's kind of lacking, and and obviously things are not going to work out if that's the case. Um, but she remains kind of a role going forward past this season, so I am curious to see what they're going to do with her next. The next character I'm going to talk about is Buck Cashman, who is Fisk's security aide as the mayor. And in my opinion, he's kind of like the new Wesley from season one, which was Wilson Fisk's right hand man. And nobody has ever been able to kind of really replace him. But I think Buck probably comes closest to it. Um, but I would say that Felix Manning was also very important to Fisk in season three, but he never had that like direct personal relationship with Fisk, and I wouldn't say Buck does either, but it does seem a little bit closer than Felix Manning, who was like I think all business with Fisk. So, and I also think Buck is very like kind of charming in a similar way to Wesley, which is why he seems like the new Wesley. Just not as much. He's a little bit more handsome, but not as charming. And then the other person circling Wilson Fisk's kind of corner of the show is Daniel Blake, who's a young intern at his office as well while he's being the mayor. And this character gains credibility from his unwavering loyalty slash support for Wilson Fisk. um, because beforehand he wasn't like in politics very much, but because of how much he just kind of got on board with Fisk's kind of plan for the city, he went out of his way to kind of get as many signatures to get him like on the like in the running for mayor, and obviously helping him win the mayorship, and then afterward being on his team to kind of help him enact his vision. um, so he was a really cool character, and I think Michael Gandolfini he did a really good job portraying the kind of young aspect, not too young, more like 20s young, where maybe he could still be kind of manipulated in some ways in terms of like his mind and like who he kind of latches onto for like I guess a role model, because I would describe Fisk as Daniel's role model. Like that's how Daniel sees him. Um, but also like really like excited. Like he's excited to do the job. He's not jaded like maybe an older character would be. Um, all right, so the next character I'm gonna talk about is BB Urich, who in this season was like a barely there journalist and also the niece of Ben Urich from season one of the original Daredevil show. And I would say her use this season, she was mostly seen, quote unquote, seen because she wasn't actually in them, but her impact was mostly felt through video interviews of New Yorkers on her like video show, like kind of news show, called the BB Report. And those videos did do a good job of kind of having the city feel like a character in itself, and having everything that's happening with Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk seem or like feel like it's having an effect on the actual city, which was really cool because we never got to really see that vibe from the original show. And one of those like human elements is something that we might have been missing in a lot of recent MCU projects, where we don't actually see the superheroes saving people. Um, and it seems like disconnected from the actual world of just the ordinary civilians. So that was a kind of cool way to bring that in a little bit. I'm expecting and hoping for that to actually be a bigger part of season two, because it was pretty much just in the BB report that we felt some of that stuff. Um, and then maybe a little bit with Fisk's kind of campaign and win for the mayor position. Um, but then we didn't really get to see any of that stuff beyond that. So I'm hoping in season two where that we see more of that there. And then the next character I'm going to talk about is another vigilante that appears in this season slash hero, and that's Hector Ayala, the White Tiger, who's a new addition to the MCU. And in my opinion, he's probably the best character ever put to screen with such a short screen time that he has in this show because he only appears in 2 episodes. But like those 2 episodes fucking hit. Like his character hit me, it impacted me to like a crazy level. And I don't think I've ever cared about a character who had like such a small role in the grand scheme of things, like I did his character. And that I think is largely due to the performance by Kamar de los Reyes, who sadly passed away before the show was released. I think he passed away in 2020. I actually don't know if it was, I think it was 2023, so 2 years ago. Um, Possibly earlier, I'm not sure, but I think I might be confusing him for somebody else who passed away in 2021. Um, but his performance was fucking amazing, and basically all else that I could say about him without spoiling anything is that he's just another vigilante who rises in the absence of Daredevil when Matt focuses on his lawyer side. And he's the pure good of the show because Matt and Fisk both have two sides to them where they kind of want to be good or be one way and like not really resort to their like darker halves where for Matt it's Daredevil, for Fisk it's obviously being the kingpin of crime. As mayor he wants to kind of be better. Hector is just all good, like there is no really two sides to him. Hector is White Tiger, White Tiger is Hector. It's not, there can't really be a divide. Um, and that also kind of plays into the story a little bit too. But I'll talk about that in the spoiler section. And then another character we see is his niece, Angela del Toro. Um, and she wishes to kind of follow in her uncle's footsteps and also be a hero. And the actress who played her also gave a great performance. I actually didn't know her name and I don't remember it from the top of my head, but I'll add it to the screen while I edit. Um, when I look it up later. She also didn't get too much to do in the show, but there is a lot of setup for her to be seen in the future, and I am excited to see more of her whenever that happens. Obviously, I think in season two, but maybe even past that. We'll see. Muse is a serial killer who dresses up with a mask and who also is an artist, a street artist in New York at this time. And he, this is not really a spoiler, it could be considered a spoiler, but it's just pretty much his character. A serial killer who uses his victims' blood to create art, to paint. He mixes it with paint and he creates murals on the walls of the city, on the streets. Um, and his character is kind of a catalyst for both Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk to return to their past roles as Daredevil and Kingpin, respectively. But he's more of a plot function than really a character in this season. And I was disappointed by that because I was kind of expecting him to be a really cool character, but he ends up not really being. Um, but he can be scary when he first appears, and I did like him in the beginning. I just feel like they didn't really do his character justice by the end of it. The next character I'm going to talk about is somebody else who works in Fisk's office, and her name is Sheila Rivera. She's his political aide who kind of teaches him how to navigate the political sphere, since that's something that's new to Fisk. But Sheila, I forget how they say her name. I think it's Sheila. She's actually from politics, so she knows that business more than anybody else on Fisk's team, because that isn't what they kind of started out on. He kind of they just either volunteered in Daniel's case or came from some other line of work like Buck. Um, and in a way, she's kind of Fisk's handler because she's always holding him back from like just doing whatever he wants to do, and because there's these protocols you have to follow in politics, and she's the one that's like, no, you got to do this first, you got to do this. I'm not sure we could do that. She's the one kind of telling him all these things, and that's why I kind of describe her as that. um the next few characters, well, next two characters are more in Matt's sphere. And the first one is Kirsten McDuffie, who is Matt's new business partner at a new law firm called Murdock and McDuffie. Um, she's hardly a character in this season. It's kind of more maybe like a setup for a character that we might see in season two, but I don't even know how much we'll see her in there either. But she could be cool, but they just didn't give her anything to do. And she's supposed to be like a really good lawyer like Matt and Foggy, but like we never get to see that. So I don't buy that because hasn't been proof of her being a good lawyer. Like we've seen Foggy be a great ass lawyer, and we've seen Matt be a great ass lawyer as well. Um, but Kirsten, we have not seen that yet, so I don't have much to say beyond that for her. Then there's this other character who's a former NYPD officer, who is no longer an officer and he just does private work. Um, and his name is Detective Cherry. And basically, the way I would describe him is he's Matt's Gordon type figure, Commissioner Gordon, kind of tying back to the Batman Daredevil comparison. But in my opinion, he's nowhere near as interesting as Gordon. Um, but that being said, I didn't mind him in the story, and I think he has a little bit more to do than Kirsten, but he's not any more interesting than her, in my opinion. And he kind of just does a job to advance the plot. Um, and when I get into the spoilers, I'll talk a little bit more about him and things maybe they could have done differently with Cherry's character. But the next character I'm going to talk about is Officer Powell, who is another NYPD officer who's currently serving, and he's the head of the corruption within the NYPD, at least in the show. Um, because we see that there's like a group of NYPD officers who some of them might interact, some of them might not, but they're all kind of like dirty. And this guy is probably the worst of the bunch. He's just an absolute asshole piece of shit, but you love to hate him in the show. So it's kind of a fun experience, at least for me, watching him, and it sometimes could even be shocking, but you just want this guy to lose every time you see him, and sometimes he does it, and it could be to some comedic effect, which is always fun to see. Um, there's another character who's in a similar boat, but he doesn't come into the picture until later on, and his name is Sergeant Cole North. And in my opinion, he is underused, and he's kind of a secondary antagonist um, in this season. And I had heard about his character from the comics because I think we had actually, or like there had been leaks about set photos from when this guy was filming. So I had seen him on the set, and I expected that he would have a bigger role because of those set photos and because of what I saw or found out about him from the comics. But in my opinion, they didn't really give him a good storyline, and I'm gonna talk more about him as well in the spoilers because his role is very spoilery. There's not really much to him beyond spoilers. So yeah, but I guess what I could say is that I feel like Powell and Cole North could have just been combined into one character, and it would have been a little bit more seamless. But like I said, I'll talk about more about it later. Um, the next four characters are returning characters from the Netflix series. Um, and the first that I'm gonna mention is Bullseye, Benjamin Point Dexter, and he is also not in the season a lot, but he kind of kicks off the story. But he's sidelined after the first episode. Um, and for the whole rest of the season. But there is again more potential for him to have a bigger impact in season two. And the only reason why he's not in it as much is because he wasn't in the initial plan for the season when the original creators of the show were making it. Because Daredevil Born Again, at a certain point in filming, when the strikes were happening and other stuff in Hollywood, um, they like took a look at what they had filmed so far, and the like lead actors, Charlie Cox, who plays Matt Murdock, and Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays Wilson Fisk, were like, I don't know if where we're headed is the right direction to go. So the executives kind of agreed, and they're like, all right, well, maybe we need to kind of restructure this, and they brought new showrunners in to basically bring back some of the connective tissue from the previous Netflix show into the show, into Born Again, because originally they were kind of trying to separate themselves from it, and it was gonna be kind of like a soft reboot. But here it's more of, yes, a different show, but still kind of a season four of that Netflix show. It's a different show because of the feeling of it, and obviously I think the cinematography also is a big thing, but the characters and the storylines are carrying over from everything that happened before, and that's mostly from the new creators. So Bullseye wasn't gonna be in it, but when the new creators came on, they're like, well, Bullseye has to be in it because he was left kind of on a cliffhanger at the end of season three. And it's not like directly following that, but it does seem to be like Bullseye's first kind of major actions since that show when he does show up here, so it does kind of make sense within the timeline. Um, and again, I'll talk about him later in the spoiler section. Foggy Nelson, Foggy, Matt's partner before, um, is criminally underused in this season, and I don't know if you could really get around this without spoiling it, but I guess I'll try my best not to. But obviously, there's something that happens with Foggy that makes him not be as big of a character as he has been before. Um, and yeah, it just kind of sucked. Like he was barely in it at all. So that's all I'll say about that. Karen Page is in the show a little bit more than Foggy, and I feel like she had a great presence that pretty much bookends the season. She's only in episode one and episode nine, the finale. And she's the only anchor to Matt's previous life in this show. And that's kind of why her presence is very important. Because he's kind of living a lie in this season, and like at the end when she comes back, he kind of has to admit the truth to himself as well as to others for maybe the first time in this entire like time of his life where he's just solely devoted on being a lawyer. And there's a lot there that it was really good and that I want to talk about more later. And then the last character that I'm going to mention, and I think the last kind of big character that is worth mentioning, is Frank Castle, the Punisher. And he is in pretty much one episode as well, but he has one scene in another episode. But originally, I believe it was supposed to be I mean, I don't know exactly the plan, but it seems, or there was something along the lines where that scene might have been a little bit closer to his role in the finale, which is the only episode he's really in. Maybe not in the same exact episode, but shortly before that. Where but they moved that scene into episode 4, which is pretty much the middle of the season. And I do think that where that scene takes place made sense and it worked. And that scene is actually, I think, the best scene in the entire season. The scene with Frank Castle. It's him and Matt, just them two talking in a room, and that scene is so emotionally driven, and it pretty much like, in a way, kind of sums up the season in a really, really, really tight, fascinating, interesting, and enjoyable on an entertainment level way, and that's why I would consider it the best scene. Um, we see more of the Punisher side of him in the finale, and that's when the only time he gets to do some action. And in my opinion, I don't know if other people would agree with me on this, but in my opinion, the Punisher side of him kind of sucked. For me, the Punisher depiction was a huge departure from his Punisher portrayal before in the Netflix shows, and not only Daredevil season 1, but also in the Punisher series that John Berthal had himself. Here, he seems very different, and it kind of seemed like a character, not full assassination, but it seemed out of character a little bit for him what he was doing in this show. Um, as always, though, he was brutal as the Punisher, and that's not what I'm talking about. It's just like, I'll go into it more in the spoiler section, but it's just like the way that he was doing things, or like who he was doing it to, I guess, that made me a little bit like uncomfortable. And maybe it's the creators trying to kind of change what they had done before in the Netflix series, where he Frank Castle was kind of heroic, but Punisher's not supposed to be a hero. So maybe that's why they portrayed him like this in this, because he's not supposed to be heroic, and he doesn't feel like that here. He does feel like just kind of a straight up bad guy for those actual Punisher scenes. Like when he has like this, he still has that softer side in that one on one scene with Matt Murdock. But when he's being the Punisher, he's actually being the Punisher, and that's where it just felt weird to me, because I thought we were gonna get the same character that I had seen and kind of fallen in love with before, but then we got something kind of different. So it just kind of threw me off. Um, but I'm curious to see where he goes in the future and to see how much of that is gonna play out, or how it's gonna play out. Like maybe it'll all work out later, but just right now, I didn't like personally what they did with him in the finale. Um, the next section I'm gonna talk about. Um, well, I guess I'll briefly talk about the costumes. The only real costumes in the season are Daredevil. I guess Muse as well. Um, but I guess I'll start with his costume. His costume, I think, was really good. It was it was looked very accurate to the source material. So that was cool, and I also liked the added element. I don't know if this was necessarily in the comics or not, but his costume was made out of canvas, which fits for him being an artist. So that was really cool, and it was stapled together because he's not a costume maker. He's an artist, but his art is not making clothing. So it was just a hobbled together outfit with some overalls, because he has his base in the subway lines. So he wears these like rubber boots to protect him from the currents and the in the railing on the train rails. Um, and then he just wears this beanie, which is kind of an artist thing to do, I think, wearing a beanie, especially a white artist. Um, and he is a white character, white male character. Um, Daredevil's costume in this, which was a new costume, I really like. I think overall, it seems like from some of the scenes they filmed pre-overhaul and then post-overhaul might have like had it might have fitted differently on Charlie Cox's body or his face at least the cowl, the mask. I think maybe the whole suit, but it's more noticeable in the face with the mask. Um, where sometimes it doesn't look as good, and I think that was in the pre-overhaul scenes where I think Charlie's face might have been a little bit bigger, or the mask might have like pressed his face, where his kind of cheeks were like kind of squishing outward. But in the overhaul scenes, it looks like pretty clean, where it's a really it looks like it's like fitted very well and maybe hopefully more comfortable for Charlie Cox as the actor wearing it. Um, and it's just a lot cleaner. Um, the red pops a lot more than the original Netflix costume did, and I think just the design of it itself is a lot cleaner. It still has some possibly like you would consider unnecessary pieces, and it's still lacking the logo, the Daredevil logo with the two D's, as you could see here in the comic book version, which kind of sucked because he should have it. He should have had it, in my opinion, as soon as he came into the proper MCU. In She-Hulk, it would have been cool to have just one big D on the yellow costume, um, and then here to get both Daredevil double D's on his chest, but he doesn't have it yet. But the rest of the costume looks good. I really like the texture of it, and they added some texture to the cowl itself, which was really cool. I don't know if I prefer that, but it does have a cool effect, where it makes it capture very well on film, especially in one scene, which I'll talk about in a later section. And then the only other character besides them two that has a costume. Oh shit, I keep forgetting about characters. Is I guess there's two characters. White Tiger's one. His costume isn't that cool. It's very like street costume, like kind of like a Arrowverse, CW type costume. But I like his mask. Like his mask looks really cool when he's putting it on in a straight on shot. But then in other shots, like when he's looking to the side, it kind of looks funny, and it kind of makes his head look like really long. But the basic design of it, I think, is pretty cool, and the costume could be better if it wasn't like designed in the way it was, where I think his pants and maybe part of his shirt is like camo, but it's all white camo, like gray, black, and maybe white. I don't know exactly if all those colors are there, but it's like grayscale, and I don't think it looks good. It fits for the character because he has a military background that is mentioned, but it just looks weird. Like it would have been better if he just bought some like white jogging pants, and like if you wanted to design it, do whatever, spray paint it or whatever you wanted to do with it, instead of wearing like this kind of do it yourself kind of cosplay type costume. Um, so his costume wasn't the best. And then the other character that I was gonna talk about before I remembered White Tiger is Bullseye. And Bullseye has a costume in the comics. Here, his costume is also like not really comic accurate. It's not there yet, but we do see kind of signs of him actually being Bullseye, having that actual moniker or title. I don't think they ever called him that in the Netflix show. Um, but the first time we hear it is actually from Frank Castle, and we do see the symbolism of a bullseye on him, which we only got an Easter egg nod at that in season 3 of Daredevil when Dex was a kid playing baseball. I don't know what his team name would have been, but his cap had a bullseye on it. Um, and that was all we got. Here, there's a little bit more incorporated into a costume for him. But it's on his gloves right here. Not on his mask, which he has in the comics. But he does have a mask, and it's just basically like a ski mask where only the eyes have an opening for him to see through. And I thought I wasn't gonna like his costume, but in my opinion, it actually did work in the show. But I do hope to see a more accurate, like traditional costume in the future. Um, but that's all I'll say about that. Now the action, which is a huge thing in Daredevil and in comic book adaptations in general, I would say in this season is minimal, which is kind of surprising. And okay overall. But nowhere near the quality that the Netflix action had. And on the other note, I do think it's better than other Disney Plus shows from Marvel. But still probably not the best. Like I think I might prefer the action in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier over the action in this. But they're pretty close. Like the action is good when it happens, and it's also brutal when it happens. And it's very hard hitting, which does make it kind of worth it for it not being as big of an aspect, because when it does happen, you feel it, and I did enjoy it. I do maybe wish there was more. I honestly don't regret it, but I do hope there's more in the second season because there wasn't as much in this season. And it makes sense because Daredevil wasn't part of it. It makes sense that there wouldn't have been as much action. But they still find excuses to get Matt Murdock into some scenarios, even when he's not suited up as Daredevil. So it was cool to see that, because we never got to see that much of that in the Netflix show. I think the most was probably in the season 3 episode where he's escaping the prison. Um, but and then some parkour stuff, but then that's pretty much it. Here we actually get at least like two straight up action scenes with him, just in his Matt Murdock kind of suit and tie. So that was kind of cool. Now the next section that I'm going to talk about are the themes of the show. The first one being vengeance, which is something that both Matt and Fisk deal with in some way, and I could talk more about that specifically in the spoiler section. Um, Another theme, I don't know how to put it into like one word or like category, but it's basically like that people change and that they can change for the better. Um, because Fisk tries to be better than he was before, and the reason for him doing that in this season is to get by in the public eye as the mayor, because he has to kind of be seen a certain way for him to really be welcomed and like supported by the people. And then Matt is 100% focused on lawyering. Even when things start to call for Daredevil, he still kind of pushes back against that and tries to do things through the system. Which, like, the way that he sees it, Daredevil kind of represents the darkest part of himself, but Matt Murdock represents the lightest part of himself because he's doing things through the law and not against it. Um, and they both are like kind of really set on that being them now, but neither one of them fully thinks that the other one is going to stay within that lane. So they both expect the other to break at some point, and obviously when it does, it creates some interesting conflict and opportunities for the storytelling. Um, the next theme that I want to mention is the nature of people and their like duality, which kind of ties in with that previous theme. And the main kind of thesis of the season is that everybody has a darkness within them, and you can only mask aspects of you of who you are when it comes to that side of yourself, the dark side of yourself, or anything else that you might be trying to hide. But you cannot ever fully rid yourself of that side because that is who you are. That's part of who you are, and that's something that's true for both Matt Murdock as Daredevil and Wilson Fisk as Kingpin. Um, and then I would say the last kind of major theme of the season is corruption, just in general, and that applies to the institutions that we see in the show, which is obviously the political sphere and the mayor's office, the police, um, the law system, just in general, the legal system, judicial kind of government, um, and then um, corruption through power as Mayor Fisk becomes mayor and kind of starts creating like avenues for himself for his kind of vision for the future. He gets power, more power than he ever had before, and then also through that money, um, which we see through some of those other avenues as well. Um, with the police, we see the NYPD brutality, and that's obviously a part of corruption. And then within the politics, we see blackmail, and then certain politicians turning a blind eye to certain things for one reason or another. And then we also see the law and specifically the prison complex play into this a bit with one episode where it's like a smaller kind of legal storyline in that one episode after getting more of that in the first half of the season, with this one character called Leroy Bradford, where he's arrested just for stealing a box of candy. And he points out this like crazy but true statement that the government or yeah, I mean pretty much the government would spend more money to lock this dude up for a certain amount of time because of his past like offenses than they would to just give him the food or feed him when he's like starving out here and hungry. Um, and that like shows a major kind of flaw in the system in the institutions that we have. Um, and I think race for him in particular is a big factor in that because he was a black man. Well, he is a black man. Um, so there's that as well as like institutional racism, which it's only in it with him in this season. It doesn't really apply to anything else in the season as far as I can recall. But that was one aspect that is something true that the show did kind of touch on briefly. So I did think I needed to mention that. Um, Now I'm going to talk about the music, which in this season was very good, as I would say it always has been in the Daredevil show. Um, I would say that the theme here, though, is more prevalent than it was in the Netflix show. But at the same time, it could be actually as a detriment because sometimes the music kind of undercuts some scenes where like I feel like it seemed kind of random that it would kind of start out of nowhere. And I felt that at least twice, where I actually like noted that in my mind when it happened. I was like, that's kind of weird. Why is the music playing right here, or why is that music playing right here? Um, but overall, I enjoyed it. I liked it, and I liked that the theme kind of shows up more than beyond the kind of title sequence, which, from my memory, is the only time we really heard the Daredevil theme in the original show. Here it's the same theme, it's just reworked by different composers, and it's actually incorporated into the show as we're seeing it. Um, and I was able to listen to the actual like soundtrack of the first half of the show, and there's like one song that really stands out that I'll link here. Um, I haven't had a chance to listen to the second half music yet, but I'm sure it's good. Um, and I don't know if I would say if I have a preference over the Newton brothers who did the music here versus John Paisano who did the music in the original Netflix show as well as the Defenders. Um, but they do honor that original music, so that was cool. There's also new music though for certain characters where they didn't bring it over. Um, but but it was good overall. Uh, I guess I should also mention that there's also licensed music in this show as well, which was not something that we saw before in the Netflix series, which is also some one thing that separates the two. And the licensed music I think was really good. What they used and when they used it was really good. Um, but that's all I'll say about that. The next section I'm going to talk about is the cinematography, which in my opinion was great in only like a couple of episodes. And those episodes being episode one, the premiere, and then episode eight, which are also some of the best episodes of the show. And maybe the cinematography is one of the reasons why they're the best. But I don't think it's my primary reason for thinking so. But they are huge aspects, and because of the cinematography, those two episodes stand out more than the rest. And there's some standout moments in episode three, I would say, and then the finale, but they're not as good as one and eight, in my opinion. And then for the rest of the episodes, the cinematography, I think, just does the job. It doesn't stand out, but it's also not bad. Um, so that's how I'll describe that. The next section I'm going to talk about is the lighting, which I think this might be the first time I've ever spoken on lighting in a review, but it was very kind of prevalent to me in Daredevil Born Again, and I think intentionally so. It was very bright, which, like I said, isn't I think intentional for the show. I think to kind of create a certain feeling um, that kind of ties maybe to some of the themes of the season. But in terms of just the way that it looked, I wasn't a fan of the lighting. I think it was too bright for me. It just is kind of ugly. Whereas before in the Netflix series, we had a lot of like kind of warmer tones overall, and it's just like prettier to look at. And it kind of added a little bit to the grittiness too of Hell's Kitchen in that show. Whereas here, I think maybe we get a better sense of New York as it actually is in real life, but the Netflix show was a little bit more stylized, and that kind of came through with the colors. I think that's probably the best way I could describe it. And it's kind of the comparison of The Dark Knight and Christopher Nolan's version of Batman versus Matt Reeves' The Batman. I would compare it like that. So The Dark Knight is like this show in terms of the look of it, and then The Batman is like the original Netflix show. And I prefer both the Batman and the original Netflix show in terms of the look. So that's my opinion on that. Um, Now I'll give my overall score out of 10 for the season. Then I'm gonna go into my ranking of the episodes and then the spoilers. So I would give this season an 8.5 out of 10 because I did enjoy it overall. Sometimes very much, but there was one episode in particular that I actually was like, what the fuck, this shit is ass. And that was episode 7. So that episode alone probably brought this down a lot. Like maybe I might have given it a 9. Maybe not a 9, but an 8.75 at least. But that one episode brought it down to an 8.5. And honestly, it could possibly be lower than that, but because I did like a lot of things about it, which maybe is just the characters because of my love from the previous show, I just brought that over to this show. I'm gonna give it an 8.5. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time, and peace.